For the first time in its 124-year history, the iconic Flatiron Building is opening its doors to residents.
Let's talk about the Flatiron Building, a building everybody recognizes and almost nobody truly knows. Since 2019, it has sat completely empty in the middle of one of the busiest intersections on the planet. Its last tenant, Macmillan Publishers, left and never came back. Its three co-owners went to war in court over what to do with it. And when a judge finally forced a public auction to settle the dispute, a man named Jacob Garlick walked in, bid $190 million, won the whole building, and then vanished without paying a cent. Now, after years of legal battles, a failed auction, and a renovation bill that would make your eyes water, the Flatiron is finally becoming 38 luxury condominiums. But this building did not get here easily. It never has. Because from the very first day someone drew up the plans in 1901, the Flatiron Building has been one argument after another, and somehow it has won every single one. Let's start at the beginning. Because before this building was iconic, people thought it was a joke. The year is 1901. A real estate developer named Fuller Construction Company has just acquired a very awkward piece of land in Manhattan. The plot sits right at the intersection of Fifth Avenue and Broadway, where the two streets cross each other at a weird angle and create a triangle. We are talking about a sharp, pointy wedge of land, where the tip is barely 6 feet wide. When it was built, the triangular shape turned the intersection of 23rd Street into a wind tunnel, splitting airflow from two avenues and a park into chaotic downdrafts and updrafts that swirled around the prow. The winds raised women's skirts and scattered paper bills from pedestrians' pocketbooks. In an era when a glimpse of ankle was considered scandalous, men began deliberately gathering on 23rd Street to watch. The crowds grew large enough that loitering near the building became a recognized and punishable offense. Any sensible developer would have looked at that land and walked away. But Fuller Company decided to take the problem head-on. They hired one of the most celebrated architects in America, a man named Daniel Burnham, and told him to build a skyscraper on that triangle, because Burnham was not a small thinker. He was the man behind the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. What he designed was a 22-story, 285-foot building that matched the shape of the plot exactly. Every floor was a triangle. The whole structure tapered down to that legendary sharp point on the north end, where the two avenues converge. The press started calling it Burnham's Folly. Critics said the wind would knock it over before the decade was out. New Yorkers placed informal bets on how long it would last. One newspaper suggested it looked like a slice of pie someone forgot to eat. But Burnham was not playing. He used a steel skeleton frame, which is one of the earliest uses of this technique in New York City. Instead of thick masonry walls doing all the heavy lifting, a hidden internal cage of steel carried the load. The walls became a skin hanging off the skeleton. This is the same basic principle used in almost every skyscraper built today. In 1902, it was genuinely revolutionary, and it solved the wind problem too. Critics were terrified the building would topple. They did not understand that Burnham had engineered it to sink deep into Manhattan bedrock, the same ancient rock that would eventually make New York the skyscraper capital of the world. Construction wrapped up in 1902, 1 year from start to finish. And then something unexpected happened. People fell in love with it. The building was officially called the Fuller Building, named after the construction company that commissioned it. But New Yorkers started calling it the Flatiron almost immediately, because it looked exactly like the Flatiron people used to press their clothes. The nickname stuck. Photographers could not leave it alone. Alfred Stieglitz, one of the most important photographers in American history, captured it in 1903. His image shows the building rising out of a snowy, misty New York morning, bare tree branches framing it from Madison Square Park. It is genuinely one of the most beautiful photographs ever taken of a building. Then came the painters. Edward Hopper was drawn to it. Artists across every generation used it as a subject. By mid-century, it was not just a building. It was the building that said New York louder than almost anything else. Early postcards mass-produced it globally. Hollywood figured that out fast. The Flatiron has appeared in more films than most working actors. Spider-Man, the 2002 movie, used it as the home of the Daily Bugle, a choice so perfect it felt inevitable. Godzilla in 1998 featured it. So did Armageddon, Enchanted, and The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, and dozens of others. In 1966, New York City officially designated it a city landmark. In 1989, the federal government named it a National Historic Landmark. The building that people bet would collapse in the first strong wind was now federally protected. Now, let's get to where the story stops being triumphant and starts being genuinely painful. For most of the 20th century, the Flatiron Building functioned as a commercial office building, housing a rotating mix of publishing houses, advertising agencies, and various business firms. Various tenants cycled through over the decades: publishing companies, media agencies, and creative firms. The kind of businesses that loved having a prestigious address and an incredible story to tell. The most prominent long-term tenant was Macmillan Publishers, one of the largest book publishers in the world. But in 2019, Macmillan packed up and left, and the building went dark. At this point, the Flatiron was owned by a group of 3 stakeholders. 2 of them, GFP Real Estate and a group called Sorgente, wanted to convert the building into luxury residential apartments. Big, expensive units aimed at the kind of buyer who wants to live inside a legend. But the third stakeholder, ABS Real Estate, disagreed. They had a different vision for the property's future and were not willing to get on board. When 3 partners cannot agree and one of them is done talking, you get exactly what happened next: a lawsuit. The legal battle dragged out. Months became years. The building sat completely empty on one of the most valuable and visible corners in Manhattan, and the courts eventually made a decision that no stakeholder had wanted. If these 3 groups could not agree, a judge would force the issue. In early 2023, the court ordered the Flatiron Building to be sold at public auction, a forced sale. The first court-ordered auction of the building in nearly 100 years. It should have been clean. Whoever bids the most wins the building, and everyone moves on. Instead, what happened next made international headlines, and not the kind any of them wanted.
Well, New York's most iconic triangular building, the Flatiron, just sold for a whopping $190 million at a Manhattan auction yesterday.
The auction took place in March 2023. Bids went up. The majority stakeholders bid aggressively, hoping to consolidate control. And then a man named Jacob Garlick placed a bid of $190 million and won. Jeff Garral, former co-owner of the building, didn't expect it. He said, "I never thought someone would bid so much for the building, but it needs $100 million of upgrades. $190 million for one of the most famous buildings in American history. That number sounds about right. That is a fair price for something this significant. Except nobody in the room knew who Jacob Garlick was. He was not a recognized name in New York real estate. He was not affiliated with any known development firm. He was simply a man, with a very large number attached to his name. Under the auction rules, the winning bidder had 10 days to provide a deposit of $19 million, or exactly 10% of the bid, to confirm the purchase and move the sale forward. Jacob Garlick did not pay. He didn't even show up or call. The deposit never arrived, and so the $190 million sale dissolved, as if it had never happened. The reaction was immediate and loud, and the more people dug into the story, the more absurd it got. It turned out that bidders were not required to provide any deposit before participating in the auction. Zero financial vetting up front, which meant that anyone could walk in, bid any number they wanted, and walk back out with zero consequences if they simply chose not to pay. Real estate attorneys called the setup deeply unusual. One veteran broker compared it to holding a car auction, where nobody has to prove they can actually drive, let alone buy. The court had to step in again. A second auction was scheduled. This time, the majority stakeholders, GFP Real Estate and Sorgente, won the building back for $161 million, roughly $30 million less than Jacob Garlick's phantom bid. They now control the property. The mystery of who Jacob Garlick actually was, what his intention had been, and whether he ever had $19 million sitting anywhere has never been fully resolved. He gave a brief interview to the New York Post after the whole fiasco, in which he described himself as a Virginia-based developer and said he had been trying to line up investors. The money simply never materialized. You might be wondering, did Garlick ever face any consequences after this bold move? Of course, the city didn't just take this deception and move on. The building's majority owners sued Garlick and his firm Abraham Trust, claiming his $190 million bid was fraudulent, and that he never had the money for the $19 million deposit, despite repeatedly claiming otherwise. And the weeks between the first and second auction were genuinely bizarre. Garlick's attorneys made repeated assurances that the money was coming, blaming two separate banks for the failed wire transfer, first Truist Bank, then PNC Bank. They submitted documentation showing a bank account with a $12 million balance and a real estate inventory in Aspen and Napa, but the names on the bank account and the identities of the property owners were redacted. Nobody could verify anything. Garlick was also formally banned from participating in the second auction. And then there was the conspiracy theory. Jeff Gural told reporters he suspected Garlick had been doing the dirty work of Nathan Silverstein, the minority stakeholder whose refusal to cooperate had forced the auction in the first place, and who turned out to be a distant relative of Garlick's. The idea being that Garlick drove the price up deliberately to punish the majority owners. Silverstein never responded to requests for comment. As of today, the lawsuit against Abraham Trust is still unresolved, but Garlick has never fully explained himself publicly. He gave one brief interview after the fiasco, said it had been his dream since age 14, and then went quiet. The $190 million has never been paid.
For the first time in its 124-year history, the iconic Flatiron Building is opening its doors to residents.
The auction chaos is over. The building has clear owners now, so why are the lights still off? The answer is renovation. The Flatiron Building is 123 years old, breathtaking on the outside. But inside, the infrastructure is a product of the early 1900s. Modern commercial tenants or modern residential buyers need modern systems, like updated electrical, proper climate control, and reliable, fast elevators. Technology that a building from 1902 was simply never designed to support. Gutting and upgrading a National Historic Landmark is not a fast or cheap process. There are regulations about what can and cannot be changed. There are engineering challenges unique to a building this old and this unusual in shape. The current owners are working through all of it, and the building remains closed while they do. The debate about what to do with the Flatiron Building is over. For the first time in its 124-year history, the triangular tower's upper floors are being converted into private residences. The building that started as office space for a construction company is becoming one of the most expensive addresses in Manhattan. The Brodsky Organization and the Sorgente Group are leading the conversion into 38 luxury condos, with prices starting at $10.95 million for a 3-bedroom and reaching $50 million for a 5-bedroom on the 21st floor. Developers secured the project with a reported $357 million construction loan. The renovation involves replacing more than 1,000 windows, restoring thousands of terracotta fixtures, and repairing the 6-foot-tall cornice. And there is one more detail that I think is the perfect ending to this whole story. For the first time in its history, the Flatiron Building will be illuminated at night with a new LED lighting scheme approved by the Landmarks Preservation Commission, most prominent on the top 5 floors beneath the cornice, cascading downward to emphasize its architectural details. So, a building that survived being called a folly. That survived a phantom $190 million bid. That sat dark and empty for years while the city argued over what to do with it, is now, finally, going to light up the Manhattan skyline for the first time ever. That feels like the right ending. But here is the thing I keep coming back to. The Flatiron Building was built on land nobody wanted, designed in a shape critics openly mocked, constructed using a method people did not fully trust yet. It survived being called a folly. It survived the Great Depression, during which it sold for just $100,000, a number that is almost too painful to say out loud. It survived decades of being overlooked, then rediscovered, then loved, then fought over in court, then subjected to one of the strangest property auctions in American history. And it is still standing, still one of the first things people think of when they think of New York City. Still the building that stops pedestrians mid-stride on 23rd Street. Still the subject of 1,000 photographs taken every single day by people who have seen it 1,000 times and cannot help themselves. The best place to see the Flatiron Building is from Madison Square Park, directly across 23rd Street to the north. Go see it. It will not disappoint. And if you found this story interesting, hit that like button. And subscribe, there's more where that came from.